Hi, welcome to Seymour's World. I'm Seymour Kazimirski. I am back from Thailand. Last week we had a great show, and I truly want to thank David Day again for subbing for me. The show was supposed to originate out of Thailand, but unfortunately our guest was in the hospital, and those of you who keep writing me and asking me about the Black Rice Project and when that's coming out, I'm hoping that Dan Foxman will be okay in the next couple of weeks and we should be able to get started. I have to tell you that our theme is opening minds and facilitating conversations. That was truly an excellent show we had last week because I've had so many comments about what is Thailand really like. And I have asked Jay Fidell, who started ThinkTech Hawaii, to come and join me today. Because Jay, you've had experience all over the place with so many different guests and hosts. And I mentioned before the show that I felt that there's a little bit of misconception about what's happening in Thailand. So you lead me on and tell me how you want me to go with this. But I feel that Thailand, as well as many other countries that we discussed, everybody thinks that there's a war going on. There's not a war going on. Business is going on. Business as usual is going on. So we need to make sure that the press doesn't influence us to the point where we think that it's A, not a safe place to travel, B, even worse, not a safe place to do business.
We are the press, actually, Seymour.
Well, then that's
However, we're different.
Yes.
Okay. You know, it seems to me that this is really about the press, and it's about travel. Because you go to these places, you see it firsthand, you talk to the people on the ground, you know, who are credible to you, and you get the story from them. And that is very meaningful because if you just sat and read the newspaper or even looked at the global online press, you wouldn't get the real story. So they used to say, and they still do say, travel is broadening. Travel is more important now to validate what you read in the paper.
Let me give you an example of that. Most of you have heard of Lumpini Park. Lumpini Park is a little section just outside of the core of Bangkok where the bigger hotels are, the five-star hotels, the office buildings. And the protesters are living in this Lumpini Park. When I walked into Lumpini Park and talked to a bunch of the protesters with my translator, it was the easiest conversations we had. Yes, they're upset. Yes, they're angry. Yes, they want to overthrow the government. Yes, they want a new prime minister. But when I brought up the subject of, are you ready to throw out the old bathwater before you know that you have good bathwater? I said, look what happened in the Philippines. And I gave them the example of Marcos and Aquino. And they listened very carefully to what I said. And I said, you have to be sure that the next leader you want to be in the prime minister's post is a leader that is going to do what is best for the country. And one of the guys said, well, we really don't have that yet. We just want to get rid of the Thaksin's niece, sister, whatever she is. And I said, well, you know, think about it. And then all of a sudden a camera crew came in. And this is how this press issue. A camera crew comes in and the lights go on and all of a sudden they grab their banners and they start screaming and ranting and raving instead of having a decent discussion. So what does that tell you? To me, that means that the press has become really the center of negativity when it comes to reporting. Which means instead of having honest and open discussions where you can go parlay back and forth and maybe really talk about things, as soon as the press comes, you find this vindictiveness and this anger.
Fanning the flames, you know, that story reminds me so much of my own story in Turkey in June last year. My wife and I were traveling to Turkey for a quiet time in Turkey. The day we arrived, there were protests at a place called Taksim Park in Istanbul, and for a day or two it was quiet, it was civilized, it was an ordinary protest like you'd see among students in the US, nothing much. But by the third day The television had picked it up. The international press had picked it up. Mind you, the press was controlled by Erdogan, the prime minister at the time, or the president of Turkey, and it was a big problem, and it got more and more heated, and there were weapons and water cannon, there were rubber bullets, there was tear gas, and people were getting hurt and responding in kind, and it escalated over that week. But I think the press was a big factor. Everybody wanted the protesters wanted the press involved. The police did not. Erdogan did not want the press involved. But the press was a big factor in escalating the violence. By the end of the week, there were deaths, and there was a lot of property damage, and the country was scored. The country looked bad for the violence and the disruption.
I'm not saying, Jay, that the press is the absolute catalyst for the violence, but they are definitely a part of it.
They fan the flames.
They fan the flames. And I think that's something that we have to regard when we go into an area that's not our area, that's somewhere else. And the press wants to report. That's what they're there for. That's their job.
And they want the news that excites people. They want the news that people will read, that get excited about, so they are looking for the raw meat. That's what happens.
And that's exactly what's happened in many of the revolts that we have seen. And we'll talk about Egypt later on. But in Egypt, in Libya, in Tunisia, in all of those blocs that have tried to get some type of democracy put in place, you find the press has a lot to do with a lot of the vehemence and the anger that comes through. I found that the people in Bangkok themselves are more worried about making a living and getting by and buying a new car and a new house. The shopping centers were packed to the brim. As I said to David last week, there's only 2 areas that I felt were hurt by the protests outside of the people living in Bangkok, and that is tourism was hurt, and the economic development side was hurt, which means when we're looking at building a new factory in Thailand, we're now holding back, and we're going to wait and see what happens with the new administration. But in the overall picture, if you asked the people who I traveled with, they would have said, you don't even see it. You have to pass by Lumpini Park and actually go into it, because there's so many tents and people living there.
I don't recall whether it was Lumpini Park, but it might have been, because I want to say 2008 or 9, my wife and I were in Thailand in Bangkok, and there were protests there then too. It was in a park, and it was contained, and there were really a handful of people involved. And people in our hotel didn't care much, and nobody we ran into cared much. It was just a protest. I wonder if you drew a line from that till now, whether the amount of protest is greater, and I wonder if it's because of the press giving it more notoriety.
Well, I go to Bangkok quite often because I have business there. So for me, 2-3 weeks before I went on this trip, I called my people down there and I said, is it safe to come down? And they said, absolutely. The protests have taken over a certain section of Bangkok. It's going to be difficult to get to your hotel, but they're moving over to Lumpini Park. But a friend of mine went down there a week before I did, and he went through that, and he said, it's not that big of a deal. Yes, every now and then you hear a gunshot, every now and then there's something that happens, but that is fueled by the fan of the press, I believe. And
one other element in this, Seymour,
Yeah.
Which you haven't mentioned, but I think it's worth at least speculating about, is social media. Because both Egypt, I know Egypt has a lot of social media going on, and probably Thailand
Oh, it
too.
does, absolutely.
And so those people don't meet accidentally in the park. They talk to each other on social media first, and that's got to be an element in all of this, protestation.
I think so too. If you look at Thailand in general, and this is more from the business point of view, You can go down there and import goods made in Thailand tomorrow. You will not have a problem getting it. If you want to set up a manufacturing facility, there are still wonderful, wonderful duty-free trade zones that the government put in place under Thaksin rule that are there for, that's where we are, and it's fantastic. You get all sorts of tax benefits, you get all sorts of freight benefits to bring goods in before you have to pay duty on them. So no, business is there as usual. There could be a civil war, as I said last week, but I don't think there will be. I think this will be peaceful. If it's not peaceful, it's going to be short, because the people don't want much more than that, and the king might intervene. At this point, he is not, it's a kingdom, so the king will not do anything until if his people get into a situation where there could be a large amount of problems via shootings back and forth, the king will stop it. And he just has to say one word and it'll end. But at this stage, if he hasn't said anything, that's a very good barometer for us to say nothing else is going to happen.
Every country on its own merit. Some countries are more the tinderbox than others. I would worry, for example, and you mentioned before the show that you met business people who talked about Egypt.
Yes.
Egypt seems to me to be a tinderbox these days.
It is.
And that, it's different than Turkey, which had an abiding sense of order somehow. Although it was disorder for the moment, it would return to order. The same thing with Thailand, but in Egypt, I wonder about that.
Well, we'll talk about Egypt in the next segment. I have to tell you that of all the meetings that I had in Thailand, there was not one negative meeting that said, be careful because of the protests. And yet, if you look online and go online and say protests, you'll find a lot of people fanning the flames because that's what they read. That's what they see. I caution everybody to take a step back before you watch and listen and social media and all that kind of stuff, because there could be ulterior motives that people are using for various reasons. And I think the aspect of can we do business in Thailand, I can say yes, you can do business in Thailand. You have to be careful, but you can. And I would say the same thing in China. And you don't hear about, turmoil in China, but I know that the business climate for me has changed dramatically in China. So I say you have to be very careful when you do business in China.
Well, there's advice for ThinkTech in what you say too. I think we have to be a little concerned about the press locally and globally, that they may be looking for raw meat on a given issue, and that turns us the wrong way sometimes. And so our little mission, our little sliver of this pie, is maybe we get on the ground the way you do, that we look at it from the point of view of the citizen in the street, or rather the businessman in the street, and we give another perspective, maybe a more cool heads will prevail type of perspective.
I think you're right. From my perspective, anytime I saw a camera with a news crew around, I knew that wasn't the place where I was going to get a real story from a human being. And talking to people in restaurants, servers, talking to the general managers of the hotel, talking to business people who I've known for years and years and years, there's no fear right now. The fear is we're the people who are making the fear. When I say we, I'm talking about the news and the press. I don't think the fear is there. I think in a lot of the countries that we talk about where there is an issue, Israel is a perfect example. 5 years ago, Israel's tourism was down 80%. And yet when you go to Israel, people say they feel it's the safest place in the world because there's a lot of guys with machine guns and all that stuff. And there hasn't been, I think, a bombing in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv in 5 or 6 years, and tourism is picking up again because you're seeing the positive side. But I've been there twice in the last 5 years, and I can tell you it's one of the safest places in the world to be in. So, what is it? We're just bombarded by all of the negativism, and that becomes the way we think of a place.
So if you were a government, I make you king, you would be concerned about branding your country. Mm-hmm. You would be concerned about the revenue that comes from tourism anywhere that tourism happens, and you would want to avoid this kind of press. You would want to avoid turmoil in general. You would want to present your country as a country that's safe and friendly. And seems to me a lot of people breach that. Mr. Putin, for example, I mean, he must have scared away millions of tourists in a couple of days. But I think the better part of it is to avoid this kind of thing and have the tourism dollars come your way.
Well, Putin is, we had a guest here, you remember, from St. Petersburg.
Yes.
And I'm going up to visit him in a month. We're going up to St. Petersburg. I have to work up there. And I have to tell you, I'm not afraid of going up there whatsoever.
He'll take care of you.
Yeah, I know he'll take care of me. This is Seymour's World. I'm Seymour Kazimirski. We're going to be back in a minute with Jay Fidell. Thank you.
I'm Jay Fidell. That's Sharon Moriwaki of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. And every Wednesday we have Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. We've been doing it for some time now, and we have some fantastic guests on there, unbelievable guests who give us insight into what is going on in a very complex, sometimes very confusing, sometimes very disappointing area of progress in the state. So we love doing this. We love meeting them. We love talking to them. We love having their ideas out on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we can all make some sense of what's going on. Sharon, what do you think?
I think that's absolutely correct. We enjoy ourselves meeting with all these people and hearing about the energy and the state of clean energy, and hopefully we advance clean energy for the state. So it's terrific. Join us.
Okay, it's every Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday is Energy Day. Every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, here on ThinkTech Hawaii. We'll see you there.
Hi, welcome back to Seymour's World. This is Seymour Kazimirski with Jay Fidell. We were talking about my trip to Thailand. And as Jay said at the end, what would we do if we wanted to try to increase tourism? Or what would we do if a leader of a country decided that he wants to keep things on the status quo so that tourism doesn't think that there's a problem? So we ended up with Mr. Putin, right? What has Mr. Putin done in the last 2 or 3 weeks with Crimea that he thinks is going to be an answer to either increase the space or the land that is owned by Russia? Or does he not realize that this is going to hurt Russia? What do you think, Jay? What's your opinion?
Well, I think first he's Mr. Macho. I mean, and he comes at it from a subjective point of view because he can. He has that kind of power in Russia that, nobody's stopping him. I don't think anybody's moderating him. He's doing it all by himself as a former KGB and a guy who rides horses without shirts on, that kind. Anyway, I think what he wants is he wants to retain control of the border between him and the conventional NATO countries. And he doesn't want Ukraine to be in between. So he wants Ukraine to go away and he can move west. It's a manifest destiny type approach for him. And I think he thinks that nobody in Russia will stand in the way. They'll think it's a good thing. And that's true so far. A lot of people have supported him in Russia, which it's sort of that gives you an idea about their level of sophistication on global affairs. There you have it. It's irrational in a larger sense. He would be doing so much better if he were kinder and gentler and avoiding land grab this way. It sets a very bad precedent for Europe and the world.
I agree with you. I think the idea of bringing Crimea back, if you look at it that way, rather than say that he land grabbed, but bringing it back to Russia, I can understand that as a plan. What I don't like is when you take a club and you hit the dog. That's not what you want to do. You want to coax the dog back. You want to be able to give him some treats, give him something that says, why don't you have a referendum that you don't push on the people? And I honestly believe from the discussions I've had with Russians that Crimea should have been part of Russia, and that's where it belongs, which is fine. But if you want to be a democracy, or you want to think that you want to play in a democratic field, then you have to act like it. You can't act like an autocrat and just go in there with your club. My personal feeling is big mistake on his part. But in the end, I don't think it will be, because I don't think NATO and the US and Europe and all that stuff is going to stand in his way of Crimea. I don't think he'll go much further than that at this stage.
I think that's their purpose in developing these sanctions against him, to stop him from doing, they're worried that he's going to move the border still further west. I remember an economist, a woman, came from Harvard Business School a few years ago, and she spoke at CFA, the Certified Financial Planners Organization in the Pacific Club. And she made one comment that stuck with me that's somehow relevant. She said, you know, in our time, you measure power by money. In other words, if I move money across a border as a company, as a multinational company, for example, and I move more money across that border than the government, that one government does to another, I am essentially more powerful than that government. And I think she was right at the time, this is 4 or 5 years ago, but I think she's more right now. I think governments are actually less consequential than multinational business organizations. And in the future, tourism and all multinational transactions are what governs and what makes a country prosperous.
Well, I agree with you. Russia, and I don't know how many of our viewers know it, but Russia has more millionaires, billionaires, than any other country, more than China, and it's growing exponentially. At this stage, when we have been traveling over the last 3 trips, we've done 3 major trips this year, in every single destination we have been, Russians are there in huge quantities. In Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, hotels have desks waiting for the Russians to come with their suitcases of cash. We're not going to argue how they got it or whether it's the oligarchs or no matter what happened, Russia is creating vast amounts of wealth. And that's because of their natural resources, obviously, their oil, their gas, etc. And I think by showing their wealth overseas, in Thailand, for instance, all of the major resorts filled with Russians. All the yachts were all owned by Russians, not Japanese.
But only a small percentage of Russians.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of Russians
Yes.
are poor.
Well,
And
of
the
course.
oligarchs, by definition, are only a tiny percentage. This is not sustainable, Seymour.
That's the issue. The issue that Putin is missing here is that if he allows the country to go on the path that it's in, he will have revolt. You have to have revolt because people will only allow them being beaten for so long before they stand up. And I don't think he understands that. What I see in the Russian economy today, and Konstantin, when he was here, explained it very well. He said that...
Referring to the guy who teaches in University
Right.
of Florida
Yeah.
and who has businesses in St. Petersburg.
Correct, correct. And he said it very well. He said that Russia is still learning. It's still learning how to manage all this wealth that's coming to them. We were absolutely shocked. We were sitting, Sue and I were sitting in the hotel and we were talking to the general manager. And I said, and I wanted to understand what his customer base was, how it's changed. And he said, it's very obvious. All the money is being spent by the Russians. They come in here, they buy from all the jewelry stores, they buy yachts, they buy all that kind of stuff. They spend huge amounts of cash, all cash, because they need to get rid of their money. It's the most amazing thing because they are bringing it overseas to hide it from the tax system that they have in Russia.
There's a lawlessness here. It's not. It goes beyond a lack of caring for the greater good, for the benefit of the country and the people and all that. But it's lawless, and I think it reeks of criminality, if you will. How they got the money, how they spend the money, and how they keep the money away from the people. It's not sustainable. And the question really is to get back, to transform Russia back into. I'm not sure if it was ever great, but into a community that was a little better than it is now. How do you get there? Do you need violence to get there? Can there be fair elections? Can Putin be beat by someone else? When will this return to what it was?
In my opinion, as long as Putin is able to feed the people, pay their pensions, give them their health care, give them all of the things that they had under communism that they were used to, and then give them a little bit more, he will have satisfaction. He'll be able to continue. The oil and gas, we know, is a moneymaker. When I spoke to David last week, we talked about Thailand is going to be reformed because of the oil that they found in the Andaman Sea. All of a sudden, they have a natural resource that will create billions of dollars in the economy and could fuel good things and bad things. In Russia, in my opinion, has fueled bad things. It has not led to a more stable society where people can work well together. In Dubai and Abu Dhabi and in the Emirates in general, you will not find an Arab working. They only import labor. They import from India, from Pakistan, from Sri Lanka, from the Philippines, from Thailand. There's not one person working. Why? Because it's a shame if you work. Now, what kind of system is going to prevail in 2 generations or 3 generations when oil is no longer as much of a factor as it is today? So countries that don't look far enough ahead really will have a problem in the future. And that's why I respect a lot of the Asian countries like China and Japan, where they think generationally. When you and I look at a business plan, we look at a 10-year business plan is a long business plan. When I look at one of our companies, I try to look at 5 years. But in China and Japan, they look much longer than that, much further than that. So we're looking at a totally different system in Russia. I do want to bring up Egypt, if I may, because I did.
Before you get off, Russia has been selling gas to the Western Europe for a long time, and
the largest supplier.
Yes, and they hold them by the throat in that way. This has got to be a factor in what happens now. But what I found only last evening at a dinner party was that Britain gets liquid natural gas from the U.S. And so that changes the balance somehow. The U.S. could be a big seller of energy to balance the power. Because right now, if I were in Western Europe, I'd be concerned, that this whole affair with Ukraine is going to somehow affect the price of gas or the availability of natural gas. And there needs to be other sources. There needs to be more of a commodity and less of a monopoly. And I think this might change things. It might change things for us as a supplier of gas. It might change things for Hawaii as a potential consumer of gas. Energy is going to be affected by what happens now in Russia.
The same situation is in all of the Arab countries because they have been the, quote, exclusive source for so many years. But now all of a sudden oil is coming from all over, Venezuela, from the Andaman Sea, from Scotland, from all over the place. And that is going to change the dynamic as well. So if a country does it, just like you have to prepare your house for any eventuality, and you have to make sure that you stay healthy and you're economically viable at home, if you don't do that as a country, things can go down very, very quickly, and then you find, what do we do now? We haven't prepared for it. And I think Putin, going back to Russia for a minute, has not. Can I bring up Egypt for a few minutes? I had a meeting with a senior engineer for Halliburton who works in Egypt.
And they're oil diggers, or oil drillers.
Oil drillers, and Halliburton is, if we're up to a lot of people because of the connection with Dick Cheney and all that sort of stuff, and the $1,000 toilet and the $250 screwdriver that Halliburton, put through. They do not have a very good reputation. And he said that they have the worst reputation in Egypt itself because they feel, the way we look at it is we feel we're being raped by Halliburton. But the way the Egyptians feel, they feel that Halliburton represents the ugly American. They're the company that has come in there, taken all of their resources, taken everything away from them, and left them high and dry, basically. And it's amazing to talk. This man is, I think, 35 years old. And we talked about business in general. And are things better today than they were in the Mubarak days? No, they're still not better. They're still basically fighting a civil war because they don't know who is a good leader. Have you heard of Sisi? He's the new prime minister-elect that they hope is going to be the guy who solves it. And it was such a wonderful time. We spent a few hours together talking about business and what is happening in Egypt. And they are at such a crossroads. It could tip either way. They could go back to civil war in a matter of a day or two. Or they can, if Sisi can deliver on his promises, one, he's got to deliver on stability. They have a 60% illiteracy rate in Egypt. I thought Egypt was always, basically a strong partner in Arab lands, but it's not if you have a 60% illiteracy rate. Their tourism has dropped to zero, basically, because of what's going on. There is tremendous pressure from people who are on the Muslim Brotherhood side and on the Sisi side. It is really a country that we are not paying attention to that could be in terrible trouble. And the war between Egypt and Israel, he calls it a war still, believe it or not. His education has always been that they lost the '67 war because their women were wearing skirts, shorts and skirts. It was not because they couldn't fight properly, but because they weren't religious enough. And that in itself is such an amazing fact when you think that these are intelligent people that we thought were, fairly up there when it came compared to some of the other Arab countries, and yet they're still mired in World War II and whether the land belongs to them or not belongs to them. We're going to talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah. Well, Egypt has been, maybe not now, as you say, anything could happen any day, but it has been a moderating force on the Middle East. So is Turkey. Both of them, Rafi Boritzer, our Monday host on Boritzer's bioinformation program, is an Israeli, and he's very familiar with Israeli history of that region. He's going to be the guest on David Day's program on Thursday this week. We'll talk about what's going on. I think that's very interesting. And his view of it, I've interviewed him, his view of it is that Turkey is historically a very important country to moderate things in the Middle East. So is Egypt. And if you throw one of these countries off, take them out of the equation or make them different in the equation, you run a huge risk of having the whole thing dissemble.
And that is one of the problems that my contact was talking about. He said Egypt and Turkey now are no longer the peacemakers of the area. So who is going to be the country that's going to moderate in case of a problem? And I think that's something that is just horrible. We will continue this discussion. This is Seymour's World. I'm Seymour Kazimirski. Jay, thank you for sitting in with me today. We'll be back in a minute.
Hi, I'm Hong Jiang, host for ThinkTech Asia on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. We deal with issues in Asia that's important, including environment, culture, history, religion, you name it. So please tune in on Tuesdays. See you there.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for ThinkTech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
Welcome back to Seymour's World. I'm Seymour Kazimirski with my guest Jay Fidell. Jay and I are solving the world's problems in 1 hour, but we're trying to understand and hoping that you understand and maybe help us understand that the world, in our view here in Hawaii, is a very small world because we're all concerned about making a living, staying healthy, traveling, doing what we want to do. But the outside world is truly an important part of our future. And we have to become aware of what is happening in the Far East, in the Middle East, in Europe, in Africa. I just want to say something before we go back to solving the world's problems about one of the issues I have. We're trying to work with a company in Thailand on black rice. And we've mentioned it many, many times before. And for me to go down there and talk to our CEO and say to him, so how is it going? And he says, it's okay. We're getting the farmers to agree that we can buy the full production of that farm. I said, are you sure? Because if you can't produce the goods that you've already pre-sold, then you're in very deep hot water. And he says, no, he can't be sure. And it's very hard for a Westerner like me to go down there and say, well, how can you not be sure? You're paying the guy up front. If you're paying him up front, he should be guaranteeing that the production of that farm, X amounts of kilos of rice, are going to be committed to you. Not possible. Why? Because it's a different way of life. So we have to understand that our way of thinking is not always the only way of thinking. Traditionally, in the Far East and in Europe and in Asia, we all have different ideas about what the word yes and no means. If you go to Japan, for instance, and I've been there 100 times, if you go to Japan and you sit in a board meeting in Japan, the chairman of the board is always addressed correctly. You never say the word no to him. Even if you disagree 100% with him, you never say the word no. That's the culture. That's the way it is. In China, for instance, where you have to do business with somebody over there, you have to understand that they are going to do business at lightning speed compared to what you're used to. And you have to take into consideration that your product may not be as good as it would be if they took their time, but they never will. They will always make it quickly, efficiently, as best as they can. But you have to look very carefully at the product. You have to look at QC, quality control, and QA, which is quality assurance. Without those two, if you don't have somebody watching, you never know what you're getting. In Thailand, we have to look at other issues, and that is their productivity. In Thailand, it's a lot like we used to think about in Mexico, the word mañana. And it happens that in Thailand, we do have issues with some of their productivity. So in every area of the world, there's something else that we have to think about. And we have to know doing business in those areas are not the same as we think about doing business here. You agree, Jay?
Yes, and I think it's great that Seymour's World goes to those places and comes back and tells the people in Hawaii what it's like, tells them what you just told them. Because we have to be a Switzerland of the Pacific. We have to reach out. We have to do import-export. We have to broker relationships between multiple countries, multiple businesses. This is our birthright because we're in the middle of the Pacific. And guys like you are great leaders, Seymour. So I hope you continue to do it, and I hope you get other people to do it just like you do it.
Well, we're trying. I find that in my, I was going to say later years, I don't want to say later years, but at the present time of my life, I have the luxury of being able to travel when I want to travel, take on the clients that I want to take on, and do some of the things that I want to do. You know, my Make 'em Smile program. Make 'em Smile program, which is the program I have for the hospitals with the musicians. We're going to have a musician here next week, I think. When you do something that you love to do, you don't call it work. But I do want to ask you something, Jay. I've often felt that Hawaii doesn't understand its place. You just said something that's critical to me. Can Hawaii become a center of something other than tourism? Or, I mean, we've tried lots of things, obviously, but should we just do like Bermuda? Have you been to Bermuda?
No, but I know what you mean.
Okay. Should we just focus on tourism and giving the tourist a better experience? Or can we really spend our taxpayers' money on other things like high tech, for instance, like trying to be a place where people come to meet from east and west, like the East-West Center is supposed to do? What do you think?
Oh, that's a deep question. I mean, that's what ThinkTech was actually started around, the notion of diversifying the economy. And in the past, it's 15 years, almost 15 years that we've been attending to that issue. I would say that we haven't made much progress on diversifying the economy. And it could be that that people do hear the question that you pose, you know, should we just try to be a better tourism place, stop there, or shall we go and do other things? And I don't really think we have a choice about that. You talked about looking over the horizon, looking for a long-term plan, you know, the way a lot of the Asian countries see it. And for that matter, the European countries too, they're thinking like that. We can't afford to have a short-term plan. We can't afford to go with the flow on this because tourism is so fragile. You know, so what happened in 2008, so what happened with the bad weather and the 2 hurricanes recent decades. If we don't have some kind of diversification, this place will crash and burn on any given day without warning, without notice. So we really must do that. The question then is, and by the way, that does not preclude the idea of being the best tourist location in the world, which we could do, which we haven't done. We don't seek that excellence. We need to seek that excellence. So it's a self-image kind of question as far as tourism is concerned, and it's a self-will, building political will to establish other industries as far as diversification is concerned. That's my view of it, but I would say we have our work to do.
I think there's certain areas that we have to expand our thinking, Jay. We have to look at what we have. Okay, we have sun, we have sand, we have surf, we have water. Have we really used the potential of all of that? I work with Larry Lieberman here, which is a company called Natural Power Concepts.
I know Larry.
And Larry has come up with some wonderful, wonderful ideas, some of which are being done in Hawaii right now. One is where they're taking water from the deepest part of the ocean and bringing it to cooling towers so that we can do air conditioning. Another one is taking water and turning it into power. Basically wave power. The waves going up and down should be able to create some type of a system where the power is created. Another one is to create, and this is something that I saw working actually, which is creating a power from using the water as a power source itself. So if you take, and I'm just going to throw this out to you, and I hope the viewers are able to understand it. Take a pontoon boat, and on the two sides of the boat are the pontoon, right? That's what it sits on. Inside the pontoons are propellers. As the water goes through the propellers, that creates energy because it's going through the propellers. The propellers turn, create an energy that goes back to feeding the boat the power that it needs to create. And you get this circle of going in and out of power. You don't use gas. You don't use oil. You use a minimum of it just to get it going and get it. Like a sail takes wind, you need a little bit of power to get started, and then you get to wind. Before we go to break, I have to tell you that we are so far ahead in photovoltaic and solar than almost any other country I've been to. It is amazing. And Hawaii should be so proud of where we're at. And I know we're having our own discussions with HECO and whether they're giving us the time and the effort or they're doing the time and the effort to make it work. But we are light years ahead, and we'll discuss that right after. And I think that's something that we can really parlay into some extra business for Hawaii businesses. This is Seymour's World. We'll be back in a minute. I'm Seymour Kazimirski with Jay Fidell.
Aloha, I'm Jay Fidell. This is ThinkTech Hawaii, broadcasting live from the Pioneer Plaza in downtown Honolulu. We raise public awareness about tech, energy, and globalism in Hawaii. Technology is critical to our state. A vibrant tech sector will give us new prospects in the global marketplace and will offer great careers and make our economy more resilient. Streaming live on Ustream and Spreaker, ThinkTech allows its hosts and guests invaluable opportunities to report important events and discuss important questions, and to be heard here in Hawaii and around the world. You can find links to our live streams on thinktechhawaii.com or on our mobile website, m.thinktechhawaii.com. And you can see our archive on YouTube. It's all just a click away. We want to do whatever we can to keep Hawaii relevant, connected, and thriving in the complexity of the 21st century. We hope you will help us in those efforts. Tune in today. This is ThinkTech. I'm Jay Fidell. Mahalo.
Hi, welcome back to Seymour's World. I'm Seymour Kazimirski. We are facilitating conversations and opening minds. And I hope it's happening with you today. And I hope you're thinking about how to better your life a little bit. Are there opportunities that you have that you should be reaching for and trying to? And Jay, we ended the last segment with why can't Hawaii be something for other people, for other countries, for other states? And I mentioned to you in the break that Sue and I, we went on a boat, on a yacht, and we went around the rivers and we went all over the place. And the one thing we noticed, no solar panels, no PV panels. Last month, we did an interview in Florida with one of my clients, and same thing, no solar panels, no PV panels. Hawaii has, I think I read, and I hope I'm correct, the #1 per capita of
That's true.
solar panels in all of the United States. So we know, is that something that we could export, Jay? Is that
We have the know-how. We know how to put them up. We know how to install them and configure them and organize them. We know how to make them work, and more than most places. And you're talking about two markets that are perfect because they both have sun, and they both need power, and they could use this expertise. So it really surprises me, that Hawaii companies haven't gone out there to do that. It reminds me, Belt Collins, Belt Collins,
Sure.
engineering company.
Sure.
Back in the 70s or so, somebody in Belt Collins says, why don't we do engineering all over the world? Why don't we go to Asia and get hired? And they did, and they have offices in various places in Asia, and they're a Hawaii company that has gone out, exported their special knowledge.
Same thing with Wimberley.
The same thing with
Sure.
Wimberley Architects,
Yeah.
same thing. Wonderful to see that. It's encouraging to think that it could happen. And we haven't done that in a while. Those two companies are like sui generis. There's not a lot of other companies that have done that. But we could still do that. We could do that with our special expertise. So you're absolutely right. PV is something we could sell. It's not the panels so much as the technical knowledge of how to install them. Those are two markets. There's probably others when you think about it.
Oh, I'll give you another
We could
one
be
right
the
away.
providers for the world.
I'll give you another one right away. In my opinion, Hawaii can take much more advantage of what we have. Besides exporting what we have, it's bringing people in for a specific reason. Healthcare. The idea of having a Mayo-type clinic, we've explored that 2-3 times. I'm working right now, I am working with Canyon Ranch to try to develop a beautiful facility where people can come in on one side of the island. I can't tell you which side just yet, but because it's not firmed up, but a beautiful facility where people come for 10 days, get health screened, eat healthy food, don't drink, don't smoke, exercise, walk in the mountains, do their yoga and their meditation, and they walk out of here in 10 days, 2 weeks, a new person basically, with a new conviction to getting healthy. Hawaii is ripe for that.
Perfect.
We could do it on the North Shore, we could do it in Makaha, we could do it on the east side, we could do it on every island. And I think that would be a way to get away from the standard tourist trade that we're talking about. That's something where it would bring in millions of dollars. And that's another one, that should be explored, and I guarantee you will be explored, because there are so many in Europe right now where people come for convalescence, and they come really not just to lose weight, but to just feel better about themselves.
Get screened, get healthy in every way.
Perfect.
We have the medicine here in Honolulu that we can really help them. Now, there have been discussions many times about this, but nobody has actually had the political will to go out and do it. So if you or people can put this together, it'll be a great mitzvah for the state.
We think it is, and we think it's very easy to sell. We did a market survey in Japan, and it's like we would fill up the place in no time at all, because that is something that they want to do. Now, Americans still aren't really aware of it as much as it should be. There's a few canyon ranches. Have you heard of Golden Door? It's another one of these spa
Same kind of
type-
thing.
Yeah,
So
where you
mini
come in-
Mayo.
Mini Mayos, right? That's a good way. When I think of mayo, I think of
Mayonnaise.
Mayonnaise. Unfortunately, not exactly the health conscious mindset that we're thinking about. But in any case, it's the idea of trying to do something in Hawaii that doesn't depend solely on the typical tourist market that we're talking about. So if we can export some of our intelligence, if we can bring in another type of tourism, we'll have non-dependency on just one apple in the basket.
That's the magic word, Seymour, export. We have to have some expertise in it, we have some experience with it, and then we have to find a way to export it. It includes some agriculture, I think. It includes maybe energy itself as we go forward. I think some of our energy could be exported.
I think so. I think there's, because of the way things work today, we don't need large workforces anymore to do things. And we see a lot of ideas coming out of Silicon Valley, out of different areas where the products then get made, but there's a huge profit margin that comes back to those companies that started it. Hawaii has brains. We're very, very smart. We've got some extremely intelligent people here. If we were able to do a little bit of funding for them and get them off the ground, and there's Blue Planet and there's a lot of think tank issues here, I feel that there is room. There's room for different places of business. And I say places because a place could be an export, a place could be an import, a place could be something where people can do business in. And there's lots of them. And of course, it's easy to say that, but if we get specific, and if you say agriculture, and you say PV solar, and you say energy, and you say healthcare, and you say convalescence, those are specifics. And we just need some of our business people to say, okay, let's go after it. I personally am going to go after the healthcare. I like the idea of a Mayo Clinic, Canyon Ranch type setting here in Hawaii. I think it'd be brilliant, just brilliant.
We have to activate the generation that's coming up to see that horizon. So I don't think they see it yet. To see Hawaii as a crossroads, not only in the Pacific but the world, but to see Hawaii that has special assets that can be, made into exports, and thus made into cash, and thus made into a diversified economy that will serve us all very well.
I think for us, for you and me, is we have to get our young people, our young entrepreneurs, to go outside of Hawaii, Jay. We can't just think of it as Hawaii business. Once they go out, their mind will all of a sudden open up. When they go to Turkey, or they go to London, or they go to Tokyo, or they go to India, for instance, and they see what goes on there, they'll say to themselves, my God, we've got all these areas for agriculture. Can't we plant X, Y, or Z? And do that as a stable form of economy? Can't we do some type of high tech? Can't we do healthcare, etc.? We need, as a Hawaiian nation, we need to be able to spread our wings, to open our eyes much further than just our state alone. And I think that's what I'm hoping Seymour's World does. It opens eyes to people. It makes them see there's a whole world out there. And one of my mentoring programs, that's all I do, is try to help my young people that come to me and say, what do I do? I say, do you speak Chinese? And I send them off to China immediately. Then I want them to come back and start a business here in Hawaii.
That's the trick. It's sending them off, having them educated by the travel, and then bringing them back to arbitrage on new ideas.
Exactly. This is Seymour's World. We are finished for today, and I'm not exactly sure who's coming as our guest next week, but I have to tell you, I think it's going to be one of our entertainers who will be with us next week. I'm hoping for our Black Rice project, but I think it'll be 2 weeks before he's out of the hospital. So I want to wish you well. Have a wonderful week. I want to thank Jay for being with me today and helping me moderate, and I hope to see you all next week.